So we have here our data that we used with our self-selected words and their mean number of letters, and our random number generated words and their mean number of letters in the sample. And so what we're looking for was to compare the two plots. How did our self-selection versus the random selection compare, and which would be the better estimator of the true word length? So if we look back, remember our self-selected 5, that's a convenient sample, and that tends to be biased because your eyes tend to be drawn to longer words, whereas the random number generator, or your simple random sample, is unbiased. It's just going through randomly selecting, and that is offsetting any biases that could be made that way. As we continue to compare, we can see that there was lower variability with a random number generated sample versus our self-selection. However, there seems to be the same center trending with both of these selections. And that center right now appears to be someplace between 3 and 4. We just don't know exactly where that is yet. We could calculate that by taking the mean of all the words in the song. But as for now, we'll say it's between 3 and 4. Now, which of the two data sets would be the better measure of the center? Well, that would be the random number generator, because again, the lower variability is taking away some of the bias that was existing in the self-selected. And so that would be the better estimate of the true mean for the samples and for the song in general. And if we calculated the mean for our song lyrics, it is 3.53. So both of the data representations were leading you to that center, but your random number generator was the better representation for that. So we already talked about this before. What do you think the true mean word length is for Crazy in Love? We said between 3 and 4. And if you did the calculations, it would be 3.53 letters. And it is known that Beyonce wrote the lyrics for all the Destiny Child songs, and the average word length for these songs is 3.64 letters. Based on your samples, you have good evidence that Beyonce did not write the lyrics for Crazy in Love. Well, what do we know? We know that the mean that we have, 3.53, is very close to the mean word length for 3.64. Do we have good enough evidence to say that she didn't write it? No, we don't. That only means that we don't have convincing evidence about her not writing the lyrics, but that doesn't mean it's the same thing as saying that she did not write the lyrics. Okay, so we don't have the proof for sure one way or the other.
Mama, can I close the door so I know?
Sorry about that. Again, it's not the same thing as saying that she didn't write the lyrics, but we don't have the evidence for sure to say that. We can see that it's close. She could have, based on the trend, but we don't have anything saying that she didn't. So at this point, we're going to ask you to take out your applications 3.5 through 3.5. So 3.5 through 3.9 and some different colored pens or pencils. We're going to go over the responses that we should have and some key ideas to help you prepare for your upcoming assessment this week on your objectives for Unit 3. So lesson 3.5 was talking about some surveys that were happening, and one of the most famous flops in survey history occurred in 1936, talking about the presidential race between Landon and Roosevelt. And so they're asking about how undercoverage might have led to the bias in the survey. Well, remember, there was only people asked who had automobiles or telephones who got the ballot. And obviously, there are many people who did not have an automobile or a telephone at that time in 1936. If you think about what was happening in the United States at that time, those people generally didn't have the money to afford those items, and so they weren't included in this ballot. And also, people with less money might be more likely inclined to support a Democrat at that time, since they were looking at ways to assist people during the Depression. And then how could non-response lead to the bias? Well, now they sent out the ballots. Non-response would have an impact because a great number of those were not returned. And if I remember correctly, they sent out over 10 million ballots and they only got just under 2.5 million back for the response. So that's a very large non-response rate. So those people who didn't respond could have been too busy working many hours at the time, or they also would have been less likely to vote for a Republican. Also for number 3, they said if the magazine did follow up with people who didn't return their ballots and were able to obtain responses, would this eliminate the bias in Part A? So Part A, again, or number 1 here, was talking about undercoverage, and Part B, or number 2, is talking about non-response. Well, if you're following up with people, that's talking about the non-response factor. It's not going to eliminate the undercoverage because people without automobiles and telephones are still left out. And so that was everything on your lesson for 3.5. Now taking a look at your lesson for 3.6, we're talking about if regularly taking aspirin helps protect people against heart attacks. And so the first question was, why was it necessary to perform an experiment rather than simply asking the doctors whether or not they take it regularly? Well, we need to make some comparisons here, right? And we have to show causations with those comparisons. So we want to know if aspirin really does cause the heart attack risk to go down. Again, why was it necessary for the experiment to include a control group that didn't receive the aspirin? Again, we're trying to show causation. So we have to have comparisons of the treatment to not having anything being applied. And was blinding used in the experiment, and explain why it's an important consideration. Well, it was a single blind experiment because the subjects didn't know if they were getting the aspirin or the placebo. The researchers did know. And so those were the main ideas in your application 3.6. Now as you go to 3.7, multitasking or multiple distractions. Remember, they were performing an experiment with university students to examine the effects of multitasking on student learning. So the first part was describing how the researchers could have carried out the random assignment. So one way could be labeling students with numbers 1 through 40, randomly generate 20 different integers from 1 through 40 with no repeats. Students with these labels would take notes while completing the other online tasks. The other 20 students would simply take notes on laptops. This is talking about the random number generator. If you wanted to talk about doing it with the slips of paper, you could assign the students numbers 1 through 40 on a class list, put the similar sized pieces of paper, same font, 1 through 40, and then pull the 20 different slips of paper out. Again, you're pulling them out and leaving them out. You're not putting them back in to be pulled again. The first 20 that you pulled, you could have them take notes while completing the online tasks. The remaining 20 would just simply take notes on the laptop. Why is it important for them to randomly assign the treatments? Well, we have to try to create roughly equivalent groups at the beginning of the experiment so that you can compare and possibly show causation with what was going on. Your third question here says identify one variable that they kept the same for all the subjects and then provide 2 reasons why it's important. Well, one variable that they kept the same was the amount of time in the lecture. And why are they doing this? Well, they're trying to prevent confounding variables. And we're also trying to reduce variability, making it easier to see if one treatment is more effective than the other. Our application 3.8 was talking about, does fish oil affect the blood pressure? And so here it says outline a completely randomized design for the experiment. So we know that 14 males were selected. 7 would be assigned to the fish oil. 7 would be randomly assigned to the mixture oil. You would get your results and then compare the mean differences. So based on the data collected, it said calculate the mean reduction for each group and the difference in the mean reduction, fish oil minus the mixture. So if I look at just doing the means for each group, the fish oil mean was 6.571 and the mixture oil mean was negative 1.143. If I take the difference of the fish oil minus the mixture oil, I have a difference in means that is 7.714. So then part 3 was talking about using the results of the simulation to determine if the difference in means from part B is statistically significant and explaining why. So if I look at all the data from the simulations, right, our difference in means is 7.714. So I'm looking for all the things that are greater than or equal to that difference. And I can see only 2 out of my 100 trials of the simulation are meeting that requirement. So it is statistically significant because it's showing with a mean difference of 7.714 or greater only occurring 2 out of the 100 times, only 2% of the time in our situation. That's the chance that it could just randomly happen. That's pretty slim, right? So this would help us show causation, possibly with how the fish oil impacts the overall health. If that percentage was greater than 5%, it would not be statistically significant. And finally, going to our application 3.9, looking at is foster care a better for children than an orphanage? And so we were talking about a study done in Romania. Did it use random sampling? It did not. Did it have a random assignment? Yes, it did. Half went to foster homes at random and half went to the orphanage. So then it says, what conclusions can we draw from the study? Well, because there was not random sampling, we can't make an inference about the population. However, because of the random assignment, we can make inferences about the cause and effect. So I could say that foster homes cause the children to do better. Now, if the children in the study were too young to provide informed consent, does it make the study unethical? Well, you do want to have consent for an ethical study, right? So that's an issue. And also, it didn't make any mention of a review board, so that also would be an issue as well. So those two factors would say that would probably be an unethical study.